Well, my editing skills are crap, but can the same be said for Maleficent? Stick around and find out. I know you, I walked with you once upon a dream. I know you, the gleam in your eyes is so familiar a gleam. Still I know it's true that visions are seldom all they seem. But if I know you, I know what you'll do. You'll love me at once, the way you did once upon a dream. If you think this movie is anything like Sleeping Beauty, it's totally not. I'm Peter Franson from ChristianGeekCentral.com and Spirit Blade Productions. This is my uncut review of Maleficent. When the fairy creature Maleficent is betrayed by one who claimed to love her, her life turns down the dark path of bitterness and revenge with nearly unstoppable power now at her command, the entire world is threatened unless the love of a young girl can somehow make a difference. Okay, this story is it's predictable. It's very simple. If you're going into an entertainment experience, fiction of any kind, and you're really like a story kind of nerd, and you like to kind of like try to figure out where the thing is going and what kind of layers are going on in the architecture of the story, this is not for you. This is not something that you're going to be thrilled with. You're going to find it very, possibly formulaic or boring or whatever. In this movie, the characters are the story, especially Maleficent. It's all about just where she starts and what happens to her and how she responds to those things. And as a result, what she does to those around her and how they respond and how everybody's lives are being affected and the changes it brings about in them and in who they are. For me, I love character-driven stories, and so this was a wonderful experience for me. There was a key moment in the story that actually brought me to tears, caught me by surprise. I even knew the moment was coming. I about maybe 30 seconds to a minute in advance, I was like, oh, this is what's gonna have to happen. But even when that moment came, it still had a huge emotional effect on me, and I think that's because of the characters, not because the story grabbed me. It was unique, and I was surprised by it or whatever, but because of the characters and the journey they were on, especially Maleficent, and me feeling what she felt and feeling satisfied at the moment that was being created there. It was wonderful. So let's talk about the performances a little bit. Let's see, you guys know Angelina Jolie. A couple faces that might be becoming more familiar that you don't know their names yet are Elle Fanning. You might recognize her from Super 8. She plays Aurora, the Sleeping Beauty in this movie. And then you've also got Charlton Copley, I'm not sure how to pronounce his name. You would recognize him from District 9, from Elysium. He's kind of like, District 9 was kind of his breakout, even though it wasn't his first big Hollywood movie, but he's kind of a little bit on the rise, showing up doing these kind of character type roles. Elle Fanning, I thought, was very strong in this. I'll have to watch Super 8 again. I think I remember being, somewhat impressed with her, but I really was impressed with her. From the trailers, it didn't look like she was going to be doing anything of interest, but I really found her endearing. I thought she did a great job with what she had. Let's see here. Charlton, an odd choice, but he's always kind of odd in the kinds of characters that he plays. Angelina Jolie steals the show. She's more than just the devilish, attractive face, that you might suspect from the trailers. She's funny, she's vulnerable, she's sarcastic, she's relatable, and that's a really important thing to me. It's her story, and it's a good journey to go on with her. Talking about the visual design now and the effects, great creature designs, but they're inconsistent in terms of their tone. There are some of them that are like serious and weird and but still kind of like anatomically grounded, like you can imagine a creature like that existing and functioning. But then there are some other creatures that are a little bit more lighthearted and cartoony, a little bit of the classic Disney kind of showing up there. So it was a weird kind of blend I found. The whole movie is a mix of a dark fairy tale. It's whimsical, but it also has dark, serious fantasy elements. You know, you've got these creatures that clearly have a lightness to them and a lack of believability about them. They're just kind of sweet and cute and, you know, whatever. But then there's also, you know, these dark armor designs and with jagged like pieces of metal and you know, there's grime on the walls, and you know, I mean, there's just this interesting kind of contrast that in most cases works as a contrast. There's only a few instances where I feel like, oh, this is disjunct and it's not really kind of flowing together, but for the most part I think it works fairly well. The CG in this movie, the creatures, the objects, could be more convincing overall, and even though I kind of have an eye to pick out CG, I don't think I would be alone in saying that. I think a lot of people would probably say, yeah, they could be, it could be more convincing, but it didn't really bother me because I enjoyed what they were showing me. I'll get back to that in a second. Another negative point would be the motion capture pixies. There are 3 pixie fairies that are kind of like returning from the original Sleeping Beauty movie. The ones that sang Bibbidi Bobbidi Boo, I think, if that's the right, or is that Cinderella? I don't know what I'm talking about. But anyway, you know, the yellow, blue, and red fairies are back, and when they're in their fairy form, they become humans for a while. But when they're in their fairy form, the motion capture has made some steps forward to the point where I was like, what am I looking at here? Did they just kind of shrink down their faces and put them on top of CGI bodies? Because I could tell the way they were moving, it was like, this is kind of CGI stuff going on. But then once I saw them, well, actually just before I saw them, I was like, no, I think that's motion capture. It's still just looking a little bit artificial and animated. And when they switched to human form, it was really obvious because they used the same actors' faces. Just, you know, obviously they were modified a little bit for their smaller form, but it became really obvious what had been done once you saw them as real flesh and blood people. So, you know, that was a little bit weird and distracting, took me out of the movie a little bit. At the same time, I do see the motion capture technology moving forward. Come on, guys, 5-10 more years and maybe we'll have indistinguishable characters who are motion capture that we just cannot distinguish from flesh and blood. Maybe 10 more years. I would love to see that. But what I was going to say earlier is that what this movie shows me mostly trumps how well they show it. Throughout most of the movie. There was just lots of cool things that I got to see in this movie that made it okay that they didn't look the most realistic in the world. One thing I loved in this movie, the visible magic. When Maleficent is casting spells, it's like green ribbons of smoky energy or yellow or whatever, and you know, it was all visible, which plays to my like classic D&D kind of sensibilities and, you know, animation sensibilities and classic movies of the 80s and 90s that had magic and stuff. You could see that stuff flying around. And then Peter Jackson did so many great things with The Lord of the Rings, but for some reason he thought magic should be invisible. Lame. But anyway, visible magic really scratched a nice itch for me. So in terms of things to talk about in this movie that might be worthwhile for us to process or talk about, you know, after we've seen it, a major theme in this movie is how we respond to pain. And I don't mean necessarily physical pain, but emotional pain. Maleficent goes through some serious pain of both kinds, but mostly for her, it's an emotional pain. She was horribly wronged, and she was a victim. But then after that, she allowed bitterness to set in, and that led her to wrong others. Now, the movie doesn't make excuses for her actions, like sometimes I feel like movies and fiction can do when they're trying to humanize their villains. They'll kind of like make excuses and say, well, really, you know, you can justify what they did. No, the movie doesn't, I don't think, try to justify what she did. She was a villain, and the movie says as much. But the movie basically demonstrates how you and I can become villains if we allow the wrongs of our past to shape who we are in a negative way. In this case, in the form of bitterness, in the form of wanting to stay away from people, not wanting to be around people, not wanting to invest in people. Many hardcore geeks have been wronged, and that maybe in some way contributed to their interest in really immersive escapist entertainment. Or a lack of interest in investing in people. So as I watched this movie, it suddenly dawned on me, wow, this movie is about me. Now, I don't think I've been wronged or harmed by people to the degree that that many other hardcore geeks have. But I mean, there are certainly some wrongs I've experienced in life that make me more hesitant to be around people, that make me more kind of focused in on my own little world and not thinking about the feelings of others. And so the poor way in which I respond to past harms or insults or wrongs done to me ends up making me the villain for other people in their lives. And so that's the question I think this movie forces us geeks to ask ourselves is, okay, we've been wronged, we've been victimized, if that's the case, but what are we going to do with that? What are we going to do with that? Are we going to say, oh, I'm the victim and why don't people care about me? And, are we going to kind of be in that kind of internal thinking about ourselves mode? Or are we going to be able to step out of that in light of the grace, the forgiveness, the hope that Jesus gives us, that, all of this is going to be fixed. All of these wrongs are going to be righted. Are we going to cling to that and then be okay even when the person that wrongs us never apologizes, as is the case in this movie? So anyway, I thought that was a really worthwhile question that the movie kind of raised in my mind. Love is also a smaller theme in this movie. Is there love at first sight? Historically, Disney and other movies like the kind of movies that Disney makes, they'll present love as this kind of magical thing that very often happens on first sight. And they treat it more realistically. They treat love more realistically in this movie, and I appreciate that. Between this movie and Frozen, I feel like Disney's maybe correcting the magical love at first sight kind of view that some of their movies and stories have perpetuated in the past. In summary, this is a great movie for geeks. It scratches lots of fantasy itches, at least it did for me. And it also has some things about forgiveness, about our response to wounds that I think are especially worth it for geeks to think about, that may be especially relevant to geeks. It's rated PG-13 for sequences of fantasy, action, and violence, including frightening images. I gotta say, after watching this movie, I thought it was PG-13. I thought I was going to see online that it was PG-13. No, it's PG, but it has some nice dark sensibilities about it. So if you're the type that's like, PG, that's family fare, and I'm not interested in that, still worth checking out. It definitely has a dark PG-13 vibe to it. I give it a quality score of 9.0 out of 10 and a relevance score of 8.0 out of 10. Great movie. Please do like, share, and subscribe so that I can, know that I should keep doing these or whatever. I also want your feedback. Leave me comments below about what you liked or what you'd like to see, except for better editing. I don't think that's going to happen. I do want to tell you again, for information about our scoring systems, I guess I'm just doing that to try and point your attention to this. I don't know. Does that work? Probably not. For information about our scoring system, tons of other content and community, visit ChristianGeekCentral.com. I hope you'll come and join us there soon as we continue to geek out and seek the truth. Click.